Thank you, Joe. Yes, and thank you all for coming along. I do know, I think most people in the room, but my name is David Marshall, and I run on behalf of Cambridge Libraries, the Futurelib programme, which essentially does a lot of user research work in various ways, and that feeds into various things in terms of library service design, delivery, consideration, etc. So Michelle, do you want to say what you do at York?
So I head up our relationship management team, so our liaison librarians and our teaching and learning team, and we have kind of taken the lead on our UX work at York, and we've got an internal UX group and I sponsor them, so hence the connection really with David and the work that we do.
Yes, so I think you're going to say a little bit more on that in terms of how we've got to know each other over the years and how the work has kind of overlapped in a way or talked to each other. I will just say a slight apology in that we've put this together remotely, which brings its challenges, so you're seeing a kind of dry run. So it might be more conversation than polished presentation, but we'll sort that out along the way.
Yeah, we hope you find it interesting. We will. So as David said, we've known each other for a while, and really I got in touch when Andy still used to be here as well, heading up the Futurelib office to come and see what you guys were doing. We hadn't really started our UX journey at that point, and over the last few years we've just shared what we've been doing, how we've been working, and obviously because we had this big project around understanding academics at York, which was back in 2016 when we actually conducted the interviews with them, and I'll talk more about that. And then obviously here at Cambridge with you concentrating on those students with the student learning journey, it's been really interesting to kind of compare and contrast the similarities and differences, and that's what we're going to kind of talk about.
Yes, so in terms of today's session, this presentation.
Seamless. So we will be picking up the similarities and differences that came out of the two bits of research and some shared findings, and I think it's fair to say David actually picked up a lot of this initially from reading some of the articles that we've already published, because we're a little bit further ahead from when we did our research. And as I say, we really hope that you find it interesting and that you might learn some things. I think, as I think it was Philippa said, those qualitative kind of listening to people and what they've got to say and hearing it in their own voice is so important. Absolutely,
agreed. Yeah, so for me, there were a number of things which kind of correlated in terms of what academics were saying and experiencing at York and what the students were doing at Cambridge, but also a number of kind of more nuanced comparisons in terms of what did this mean in our context, what did it mean in York's context, what did it mean for a student, and what did it mean for an academic. So hopefully we'll try and kind of draw those things together today, and we can have that as points for discussion later as well. So that's how we came up with the idea for the presentation. So just to talk a little bit about what we were both trying to achieve.
So from the Understanding Academics project, just to put in context, we've actually done quite a lot of UX with students, so we really wanted to concentrate on the academics. We felt that there were quite a lot of misunderstandings between library staff and academics, and that can cause some tension. So things around, well, they never get their reading list in on time, and feelings like that from library staff. So we really wanted to kind of dig a bit deeper and to understand what was going on. We also really wanted to better understand how our current services were either helping or hindering the academics. And then really to think about how we might integrate that academic voice into kind of future service development.
Okay, so definitely kind of similarities in terms of the work we were doing in the student learning journey, in terms of the broad stroke why we were doing what we were doing. So it's really to develop a deeper knowledge and insights around what it means to be a student at Cambridge, using that to look for insights that can inform what we do and how we support them in their studies as Cambridge Libraries. Just to go back a few steps in terms of what Futurelib has done, I joined up in about 2015, so it's been about 3 years now or more. Before that, there was quite a long, intensive period of very kind of open, exploratory research work with students, also with academics and researchers. So that involved shadowing, it involved diary studies, it involved kind of getting in and amongst people and interviewing them in kind of their spaces. That was used to inform a number of kind of concepts, some of which we've taken forward and tested, some of which have actually kind of validated themselves. So things like Space Finder, things like the work we've done looking at physical environment design through projects like Protolib. But we were, from that point onwards, kind of focusing on individual areas of service provision or on areas of people's experience. So this was a real kind of opportunity to go out in a very proactive rather than reactive, very positive, exploratory way. At the start of the project, I asked Jess what she wanted from it, because there's usually a kind of, well, this would be the desired output, and quoted her words back to her in presentation at the end of last year, I think. But basically she said, everything we learn informs our working practices. So I was like, right, fantastic, blank slate, I will go out and find out as much as I can about the people who we're trying to support in order to kind of design, tailor, develop our services accordingly. So yeah, an opportunity to refresh and to explore the needs of current Cambridge students, because it had been a few years since the previous research. There were a few things that the work was directly informing. We've heard a lot today about CILN, Cambridge Information Literacy Network. So the conversations we're having with students did at least sometimes focus on their academic skills and those aspects that we can kind of engage with and support. And it was also supporting work which Neve, who isn't in the room now, was leading on, looking at the information needs of the physical and biological sciences. So we worked a lot with natural sciences students for that reason. But otherwise, find out what the students do, find out what their approaches, their attitudes, their goals, their motivations, in order for us to kind of work based on that. Okay.
So we're going to move on to methodology, and obviously there are a number of similarities with them, which you'll see on the screen. At York, what we did, it was quite an ambitious project, and probably shows how naive we were back in 2016, when we thought it would be really easy to just interview 97 people. The other number to make it up to 142, we'd actually already kind of done some sort of interviews with people, and we didn't want to lose that information, but 97 of them were using the same methodology, which was a cognitive map. Half the people were asked about how they approached their teaching, and half were, roundabout half, were asked about how they approached their research. So we had quite a good mix. The cognitive map, we asked the academic to talk through that. That was all transcribed by the liaison librarian. All the interviews were done by the liaison librarian. And they talked through their map, and then questions obviously followed that in the form of a semi-structured interview. We used in vivo to code. That was a big learning curve for us as well. We had a temporary member of staff who did a lot of that work. That created some kind of themes for us, which we then analysed. And we also went back to some other stuff that was happening in the sector, particularly the Ithaca survey results, which was an Ithaca survey for UK academics, which was, I think, now 2015, the results, or 2016, one or the other, I'm sorry, I can't remember.
Okay, so mine, they're kind of listed backwards in a way. I think I've put the kind of in-depth methods at the top and the shorter, more ad hoc methods at the bottom. I should say, had a long time of kind of me working full-time with a very dedicated project team alongside me. Made up of staff from around the libraries in Cambridge. But we had from basically October 2017 through May 2018, so almost the breadth of an academic year. I think it was Philippa this morning mentioned wanting to talk to students over a number of years, but actually talking to students at different stages of study, and that's how we kind of achieved that, finding out about the entire student journey as well. But I referred to the first phase of the project, which was our Michaelmas term, so October through December 2017, as the canvassing phase. Basically, the idea was to get the kind of broad underlying data that would give us kind of that lay of the land of the current student experience, but also inform the methods and the approach we took in the latter stages of the project. So canvassing stage, lots of running around with clipboards, feedback walls, comment cards, very, very broad questions around what students found frustrating at Cambridge, what they enjoyed about studying at Cambridge, and also some more specific things around their working routines, approaches and practices. If you want more detail on methodology, we'll put links up at the end to kind of the various ways in which the two pieces of work have been published, but there'll be a lot more detail in there. I mentioned in terms of the Futurelib project that it was, as well as being very broad and proactive, it was feeding into certain initiatives. So the latter stage of the project was where we could hone in on things like the academic skills, experiences and practices to support CILN. It was when we could conduct in-depth interviews with natural sciences students, really finding out about their information needs, their experiences, the ways in which they were interacting with information. So the diary study we did over our Lent term, so I think it was between February and March, I think, or maybe it was purely February. We followed that up with exit interviews with a lot of the diary study participants, so beginning to explore in detail their approaches, goals, motivations, experiences. That's also where so I've just realised Neve is in the room. Hello, Neve. Yeah, and also the kind of natural sciences interviews. The card sorting and things like that, more detail in the reports, probably not quite enough time to go into today. Okay, so really what we wanted to talk to you about, as mentioned at the start, were our findings and how they kind of challenged or corroborated, if that's the right word, or worked together or kind of questioned each other. So that's what we're going to move on to. Oh no, we're not. We're going to talk about recruitment first.
Which is sort of related.
There's a finding about recruitment.
There is. So at York, quite unlike some of our other recruitment, particularly with students, it was really easy for us to get academics to take part in this. So we took the approach, as I said, we wanted about 4 members of staff from each of our departments, and we have 28 departments at York. Some of those are very small, so you'll see that number doesn't equate, obviously. But on the whole, it was very easy. We had one department where we only had one person, a decent-sized department where we only had one person. We learnt way more in that one kind of hour with that person than we've known about the department for probably the last 5 or 10 years. So it just goes to show if you choose the right people, it doesn't matter how many people you have. We also wanted a mix of kind of established academics who had been around for quite a long time with newer academics who were maybe early career researchers. For some departments, the head of department did a lot of the recruitment for us and said, these are the people I want you to talk to. So they were quite directive and told us who they wanted us to speak to. With other departments, we might go to the Board of Studies and we had people volunteering saying, can you please pick me? I really want to do this. So it was, interestingly, it was quite easy for us. The other thing that came out of it once people did it, and we did a few trial, we wanted to make sure that the techniques really actually worked with academics, and luckily 3 of the team within the library married or partnered up with academics. So we chose them because we knew they'd give us critical feedback and wouldn't tell us it was all right if it wasn't, including the Director of Information Services, whose husband's a physicist. And he was very sceptical coming in, and he kind of looked at me and went, what is this that you're doing? And by the end of it, he said, this was amazing. And I think it really sums it up for a lot of academics. They feel like they're not heard and they're not listened to on an individual basis. And I think a lot of them found it quite a cathartic experience, that actually they could kind of vent and they could get all their frustration out, because we were asking such open questions. We were saying, how do you approach teaching a new module? How do you approach a new research project? We weren't asking anything about the library. So obviously they talked about the library in their responses, but that wasn't the point. It was to get them to see where the library fitted in with them and whether it did at all. So it was quite easy for us, and some of them even wanted their cognitive map to take away.
Yes, a couple of things to say there. I meant to say when we were talking about methods, we both talked about semi-structured interviews. I would say that over the years I've been doing research with users in various ways. Talking to people is by far and away the best way to get data. But I think when we talked about it, we said that both of us would very much put the emphasis on the semi out of semi-structured. The beginning of the conversation with both exercises was to allow people to talk about who they were, what they did, what they were trying to achieve. And then if they haven't said the word library about 45 minutes in, then you might start to nudge in that direction. But as a matter of course, that usually happens. I said that we're going to talk about kind of commonalities that we noticed, and this, although part of the research rather than research findings, was really true for both. So Michelle talked about academics wanting to take cognitive maps away with them. I had exactly the same with the students who took part in the digital diary study. Basically, it was using a mobile app. They were asked to enter about 21 entries over a period of 3 weeks. But it was basically what you're up to, kind of how do you feel it's going, and then a very hard to construct but very critical question around kind of how equipped do you feel, and particularly in terms of those underlying academic skills. What that meant was that after 3 weeks they could get a printed PDF which told them how they studied, where they struggled, what they were trying to achieve. So that kind of artifact and that ability to see your own working pattern was kind of incentive enough, really. talked about the canvassing phase when we were hovering around the university with clipboards. Now those interviews probably lasted 10 minutes, 15 minutes, did lots of them. But there was no incentive at all. I did not have a bag of sweets, I had nothing at all with me. But the amount of students who left that very short encounter saying, oh, that's really interesting, I've never thought about how I study, I've never reflected on my approach and my experience, because day to day as human beings, unless we're very kind of reflective people, that's very easy to slip into. So the incentive is almost the taking part, I think, and that's what we both found. Now we'll talk.
So the next one's about time pressures, and as you can imagine, this applies equally to both. So unsurprisingly, although what we found, and I'll talk about a bit more, is academics for the whole, they really love being academics, is what we found, but they did express a number of frustrations. So they often feel quite overwhelmed with all the demands on them. So they often have not only their kind of teaching and the research to do, but also admin roles within the department, putting more pressure on them. And one of those is being the library rep, for example. So actually we're putting more pressure on them. There's also a number of workload allocation models at York, none of which work, and which they were quite open about in terms of the issues with those. They talked about how they kind of developed their own ways of managing their workloads throughout the year. So they often lead their research to summer because obviously they're teaching throughout the rest of the year. But this was really interesting for us because, of course, the moment that we ask them about reading this, i.e. summer, is when they're trying to do their research. They turn their email off. They don't want to know about it. So I think just understanding that and where they are. For those on research contracts or doing any kind of research, I love this quote about riff. It's just riff. Funding, I think is the rest of that quote. And now there's obviously TEF, and as they said, and coming soon, the KEF, which I think actually the metrics on that have just been announced. So really the point of this was that one of the things that they really talk about later, the academics, is this need to be able to be kind of creative and innovative. And with all this pressure on them, that's really hard to do. And you can't schedule that for 9 to 10 on a Tuesday morning or something like that. You need that time and that space to be able to really think. And what was really clear from what they told us was when they do have those creative moments, that's when the academics really lit up and they were really passionate about their work. So you're going to talk about the students?
Yeah, so for me, it only really, I knew it, I think I knew it as a number, but it only really hit home that Cambridge students are on vacation for exactly the number of weeks. Many matriculated Cambridge undergraduate students are on vacation for exactly the number of weeks they are resident in college and they're during term time, so it's literally 26 either side. So that has massive implications in terms of managing workload, setting aside, I guess, the more research end of the work for the vacations and things like that. I'm going to talk about a specific conflict related to that later. But yeah, the students were really aware of the rapid assignment turnarounds, the amount of work they had to cram into that semester or that term, and the implications that had for how they approached their education over the years they were at Cambridge. Also very important to mention, there was an emphasis on working with taught postgraduate students in the more applied courses. I guess what Cambridge might be kind of less traditional areas of study and less traditional routes to study. So we worked with part-time PGCE student, we worked with MPhil engineers, we worked with public health, primary care, those kind of very intensive taught applied programs. And this person is amazing. They were working in GPs, they were in kind of class all day, every day. They had about half a day off a week to do any work outside that. And so just having that awareness of what those students for their 8 or 9 months are going through at Cambridge, I think is something that we really need to understand and respond to. More related to that later.
So in terms of motivations, as I said before, academics, it really came out that they really do like being academics, and for many it was a real true vocation, and they talked about it with real passion. They loved the opportunity to be part of that scholarly research community, working with students and with other academic colleagues. They talk with real passion about their research and about the collaborations that they have, and being able to encourage and motivate students. Many enjoyed that balance between research and teaching, and they wouldn't want to do just one or the other, and I think that was really interesting for us, because sometimes I think we assume that a lot of them, they just want to do the research, but actually that did not come out. They're motivated to do the best with their students as well and give them that best possible experience, and some of that is obviously motivated by metrics from the NSS and places like that, but I don't think, being non-pessimistic, I don't think that's where it comes from. I think that there's a real desire to do that. And they do put in long hours. For a lot of people, and I remember before I came to York, I used to work at LSE, and I remember talking to an academic there who told me the story about his kids where they just said, can you just stop working? Because all he did, because it's his life, that research is his life, so he never switches off. And I think for a lot of academics, that's the case.
Okay, yeah, it reminds me of something. This is actually, I talked about work done by, I'm not even sure it was called Futurelib at the point, but kind of extensive design research done by Cambridge University Libraries between 2012 and 14. A lot of that involved work with academics, and a couple of things Michelle's just said absolutely ring true with the findings of that as well. The commitment to teaching, I do think it's right to be non-pessimistic. I think people really, in a lot of cases, are very, very devoted to that, and that does end up with this kind of conflict. And also the time pressure and just that thing around, and library rep might be one example, but the committee meetings and the admin and all of that. The work at the time was done by people who are quite engaged with the commercial sector, so the way they described it, I think, was it's equivalent to being director of a small startup company, or it brings all that with it. But you can see that analogy being taken in different directions and just a reflection on that person's day-to-day and that experience. Okay, so for me, there were, questions we asked during interview were kind of what are you trying to achieve during your time at university in a very kind of holistic sense. I don't really care about the number you're aiming for, but I care about what you want to leave with as a person. And also, kind of related to that, what keeps you going day to day, what are your day-to-day motivations and things. Probably unsurprising in our kind of continuing economic context amongst other things, but a real focus on transferable skills, practice that could be taken beyond HE and beyond the institution into kind of the real world. Again, we did work with people in applied programs, so a lot of those are saying that. But also, so Andrew Alexander, who's kind of floating around helping with the conference today, was on my project team. He's Deputy Librarian at our Judge Business School. They run a fourth year a management studies conversion course. And you can go onto that course from any, I think, undergraduate discipline. We had someone who had moved onto it from MML. You can move onto it from the sciences. But all of a sudden, you're dealing with the world of business. And that brings with it the kind of complications and learning curves that it does. But the point is, the uptake on that course over the last few years has rocketed. So even kind of your history undergraduate might be thinking more that way than they might have 4 or 5, however many years ago. So we found, although motivations were different for every student, this was a real theme across many. The other motivation was for students who at least had an idea that they might like to stay within higher education to potentially pursue careers within academia. That led on to something which we kind of conceptualised as the student-researcher conflict. But I'll get on to talk about that individually in a moment. Yes, that's what I found out about student motivations.
Seamless, I told you. So the next thing we're going to talk about is collaboration, and obviously for academics, as you can well imagine, their collaborative networks are really important joint funding bids. So research funding is often the driver behind many of their collaborative research projects, and obviously that nice quote there about grants making research a much more sociable business. What we did find there were pockets of lone scholars still, people who set out to do things by themselves, but there were very, very few. And I think all in the humanities, which is not, again, that surprising. And I think that lots of collaboration but less explicit co-authorship was quite interesting as well. There was also a reliance on your own networks as well from the academics. That might be about papers, and if your own institution doesn't have access to that, how can you get a hold of that research? There were comments about, we've been together 30 years now and most of it happens via email, and sort of almost an acknowledgement that it's quite incestuous. And I think there was also an acknowledgement from some of the academics that can be a barrier for new kind of researchers coming in, so PhD students and things, and how do they actually use their networks to kind of for those people that are new to academia to take advantage, so introducing them to some of those networks. Some of the discussions also obviously talked about technology to enable that collaboration. Geography obviously is not really a factor in terms of how they come up with their collaborations, particularly around research, because of technology. But it was interesting that one of the academics said, obviously expertise is crucial, you need someone who knows the subject. But actually, the secondary question for them was always, can I work productively with this person? So it's really about that personality and, what's going to make a kind of sensible collaboration and what's going to be productive.
Okay. I've keeping on the time, and I think we're probably ahead of time, so I'm going to tell a bit of a story that I loved from this project. The other thing I was going to say, now I've just been looking through my notes from this morning, and again it was Philippa talking about this library of our time. She talks about communal suffering, and I kind of really like that as a term. The term I did kind of tweet this at the time, but the term we've used to describe that or similar behaviour from the work we've done in Cambridge, and it absolutely rings true, is alone together. So Cambridge is not setting a lot of group work in most areas. The students are working on their individual problems or essays or whatever, but having that kind of silent support or even the opportunity to bounce ideas and that kind of everyone keeping each other going is how we talked about that. So that's an aspect of collaboration amongst Cambridge students. We travel as a pack. This is one of my favourite quotes from the project. The other favourite quote I just remembered is, time management is always an issue, but my love of the Winter Olympics is far too strong. This was a student bemoaning the fact that they had a supervision at 8:30 the next morning, but the Winter Olympics was on, so that was the motivation. Sorry, bring that back in. So we travel as a pack. This was an in-depth interview we did with one of our diary study participants who's doing an MPhil in conservation leadership, which I think is vaguely under geography. It's about a 20-person cohort. I know we have other similar size cohorts. Jenny Skinner was in from African Studies. I think that's about the same size. It's a relatively new programme, and it is one of those kind of mid-career applied programmes. So it's people, as you might imagine, working in various areas of conservation, but wanting to take a leadership role. So it's them kind of coming in to do that postgraduate level applied course. This person, very, very early on, I was talking about kind of what does your day-to-day look like and things like that. So the first thing these students do when they arrive at the university is present to each other on their work. So someone might be looking at conservation of crops, someone might be looking at conservation of frogs. I think we had bats as well. So they really kind of get to grips with the other person's applied workplace experience. The next thing they do is they go on a field trip together for about 3 days. So they're camping together. Don't know where it was, don't know how the arrangements worked, but anyway, so they're in that kind of close-knit cohort environment straight away. So when we talked about how that looks, this person said, we travel as a pack. And basically it was, anything that comes up, frogs guy will be talking about frogs, bats guy will be talking about bats, crops guy will be talking about crops, and whatever problem we're looking at or whatever area of conservation, they'll link it straight in. There's a point to why I'm saying this. We were really interested, as well as kind of what support students might need from us, we were interested in where they would look for that support and where they would go to seek guidance and advice, particularly in terms of the areas of information support and the things we provide. Now, for this person, it was always the pack. They would always go to their peers and their cohort for support in that area. And we found, it's kind of the opposite that you might expect, that in the larger student cohorts, actually they were more likely to go to an administrator, a librarian, an academic, or kind of different support figures around their network. They actually probably have more student expertise to draw on, but they're not travelling in this pack. So that for me was a really interesting thing around how students collaborate and the implications for us around where we need to be, where we need to be promoting, where we need to be communicating. Oh yeah, and I did have a quote up to support the kind of alone together observation. Yes, for me the implications of that studying alone together is we need to continue to provide the library spaces that support that, but also support the opportunity to break out and bounce questions. But I think there's also maybe an opportunity, and some of you may be doing this already, but for more kind of formal things like shut up and write sessions or similar for maths students and that kind of stuff. I know they're happening in the university. I don't know that we're necessarily doing them as much as we could try as libraries. So, very specific thing, but there you go.
So we're going to talk about the student-researcher conflict, and I quite like this quote, so I'll give you a chance to read it as well. But what we did have were a number of kind of comments from academics about this kind of new generation of students coming in, and they don't read in the same way, they have high expectations which are linked back to the fees that they're paying, and also around the feedback that they'll get. The contact hours, the kind of immediacy of their supervisor or their academic responding to them. We're going to talk about reading a bit later, so I won't preempt what I'm going to say about that, and space as well. But they're all kind of tied together in this kind of... I'm not sure conflict is quite the right word.
Well, this is because
tension.
This is my terminology. We've tried to...
Yeah.
There are obvious parallels.
Exactly.
Okay. Right, so for me this was, I think some of you have been in rooms where I've presented on this stuff before, and for me this was one of the standout kind of capital F findings of the work. And I don't know whether it is a bit context specific, but this is going back to what I was talking about earlier. It's all linked into the workload, the term times, the vacations, and the goals and the motivations. And so this is the student who isn't looking to dive out into the workplace, who is considering staying within academia. What they really want to do in a lot of cases is develop skills that will enable and support that. It may be our end of information skills, so I think somebody possibly here mentions reading scientific articles in a kind of more academic way. But it may be the kind of more practical lab-based research skills. I should say this was kind of primarily existing within the STEM students we spoke to, less so with HSS, but there are still kind of commonalities. So yes, the frustration really is for a lot of Cambridge students is that I am getting set however many assignments a term, there's something to hand in every week, there's probably 2 or 3 things to hand in every week. But at the same time, either I really want to pursue this topic in detail, or I want to be doing original research design and research rather than recreating stuff in a lab. So this person here says, being a good researcher is fairly far from getting good results in exams. They feel that they're skimming at a very relatively low level, they're regurgitating information, but they're not engaging with research practices. What was I going to say related to that? So really, for the scientists specifically that I spoke to, the students I spoke to, that space did exist within Cambridge Vacations, and that's when they could do lab internships, that's when they could put the more research reading on the shelf for that space. And again, I think there's an opportunity for us to respond as libraries to that. We'll put up some kind of links and routes to the published reports for this stuff. But if you look at either the full report for this or there's a web-based shorthand story, there are a number of opportunities or kind of concepts for library services based in the results of the research. And one of which is a kind of MOOC online bootcamp research skills, library-led or library skills, research skills thing for students, because that's where they have that space and that's where they have that time. Yes, am I waffling?
No.
You're smiling at me.
No. I'm encouraging.
I mocked up a very dodgy, lots of PowerPoint shaped slides for how the two things might look, but it is differences between kind of having to skim a broad range of material at a low level of depth or pursuing something in depth. It's kind of seeking out time with PhDs and academics to learn from them about what the research world looks like, or it's aiming to kind of just get the result that you want and the route into whatever you want to do next. This is a very key point. One of the main kind of drivers for this conflict, one of the main issues the students saw, was that if I'm going to apply for a PhD, particularly if it's here, I need that 2-1 anyway. So I can't drop the exam-based work and I can't drop the studies to focus on research because I need to do the studies to do more research. So that was kind of one of the, I guess, the building blocks for that frustration. Yes?
Like Cambridge, York obviously wants to be a research-led teaching institution, and that teaching is greatly improved and informed by a strong research culture. And a lot of our internal conferences at York kind of focus on that, our teaching conferences, about how we can do that. And kind of aside from the comments about the kind of admin burdens that academics kind of picked up on, the importance of this kind of continued focus on research-led teaching was one of the key themes that came out across all 3 faculties. It's not always possible for all subjects at undergraduate level to be research-led. Seem to be the consensus coming out, but the majority of academics seem to aspire to this in their teaching, and it gives them more satisfaction in their work as well. And I really like this quote as well. The start of this quote talks about it makes my teaching easy because all the subjects I teach tend to be rapidly moving. So basically all the papers are current, there's nothing more than about a year old, things like that. I can't tell you which department that is. I can probably have a guess, but I can't remember anymore. Other ones, kind of other things that people said were kind of around the fact that they want to be research led, and sometimes it happens more in the 3rd or 4th year. Although they did say that there were modules that they can think of where research edge is probably too far from the material that needs to just be taught to the students. And I'm going to tell a little story now, David. You'll be pleased to know. So one academic who was in a social science department told us about how they were actively working on new ways of developing research-based teaching in that department to ensure that the course was attractive to both current but also incoming students. And the department had previously made much more of a distinction between its teaching and its research activities, and wanted to blend the two together much more into a much more integrated way. So postgrad students taking this particular course are able to experience live action research-based teaching as they're taken through kind of practical research projects and encouraged to develop real-world knowledge and a new skill set. Which is already proving more engaging to the students. And obviously remember that this interview happened back in June 2016, so we're already 2 years on from that, or 2.5 years on. And obviously that real research is inherently interesting for the student, both from the recruitment side and makes it more attractive, but actually the academics want to work in that way as well. So where they can, I think that is what the aim is, and I think that echoes what the students are wanting from what you found.
Absolutely. So this is one of the definitely kind of less tenuous links. This was something that we both looked at each other and went, oh right, wow. Just before that, has anyone noticed the very intentional optical illusion that's going on with the text on screen? It seems to be that the library bars kind of made the text do that. We collaborated over Google Slides. Other slide deck making things are available. This was genuinely when we kind of met and talked this through. This was one of the things that really stood out for me in terms of, well, this is perfect. This is a perfect world. This works for the student and it works for the academic. So again, I'm talking about students we spoke to in their 3rd and 4th years. And it was particularly, I don't know whether by coincidence, but it was particularly students in the arts and humanities. I guess they are doing, in a way, more research-led rather than repeating-led stuff in some areas. But yeah, they were basically thrilled about the opportunity that this stage of study provided to work with kind of world leaders, really, in a very specific area that they were also interested in. This is possibly a slightly over-optimistic, but also quite a confidently said quote from, I think, a very confident and a very able 3rd-year A&H student. They're saying at this stage you are kind of inputting to research, the supervisors are listening. I should have put the yellow on, they might write a book on it the following year. That kind of engagement between student and academic I think really seems to be valued on both sides. So if there is a way of introducing that in a more kind of consistent way, then that seems to be a really positive thing. I should say one of the things which sung out really around our findings in general was the real immediate appreciation of the close nature of Cambridge teaching. It might seem an obvious thing to say, but straight away when the students are in, they realise what they have with those supervisions. And as they continue through their studies, this is just the place they get to work with real kind of field leaders. There was a bit of an interesting thing related to this that we noticed with students, and this was, again, particularly in some areas of the arts, really, in humanities, in that there seemed to be some kind of confusion at the start that everything, you were going to be expected to learn this breadth of your field, and actually I don't really want to do this bit and I'll never use it and I want to focus in on this bit. And there was frustration over the kind of first couple of years of study, but then there was always the light that kind of hit in year 3 and 4, and it was like, oh, actually this is fantastic. I don't think I've got the quote in here, but there's a quote from an English student saying, I've realised in my second term of year 3 or 4 that I've kind of learned, they've said, the breadth of English literature, but also had the opportunity to specialise and hone in. But it's getting that message across, and student after student arrives without that being clear until it becomes apparent later on. That was a very rambly way of saying that, but hopefully it makes some kind of sense. Okay.
So I alluded earlier to kind of the reading and the issue that academics have with the way that students read, obviously at York. No reflection on Cambridge. So they found it was quite hard to get students to read whole books. They just kind of scan things, don't understand the wider context, and kind of a frustration, I guess, from them, which goes back to that kind of drugs comment, you know, like that we've given them some kind of drug, and I don't think that we'll ever be able to go back from that. So how they'll adjust remains to be seen. And how they're going to adapt their teaching to kind of, I guess, take on this new challenge. We don't necessarily know entirely yet.
So just to start this by saying I'm not Cambridge educated, I did my degree at Cardiff, so a much kind of smaller teaching university. But this came up when I presented the findings of this work to university library leadership. I know a couple of you were in the room. Patricia Killiard, I think, had just come from reading one of the York studies or the published work, and said, oh, that's really interesting. So you've talked about Cambridge students kind of wanting to research more and not having the time during term and not kind of being able to get enough done, and just having an appetite. And the York, they've just published this thing that said, well, the academics don't think that the students are reading. Does that hold any truth? And I had to say, unfortunately, I don't think it does much from the students I've spoken to here. I'm not saying it's the case for all Cambridge students, but yeah, that was probably the first spark to have this presentation, was that we were learning slightly different things about slightly different parts of slightly different institutions, basically. Although a lot kind of collaborated. So I found really these are both quotes from undergraduate students, I think. I put in the one from maths just because it's representative of workload. It doesn't necessarily have to be reading. It might be attacking problems and that kind of work. But yeah, no, instead of trying to skim, they were trying to learn Greek on top of it, I think. Unless this was semi-compulsory for that, it was a theology student. So that was a difference in terms of what we found. Okay, just mention briefly how I think this relates to the term and vacation cycle. Had a really interesting conversation with the Students' Union, at the time, Students' Union Officer for Education. So I thought that the students I spoke to who had this awareness of the vacation and the time and were putting things on a kind of physical or virtual bookshelf for that time, that seemed to be quite a healthy approach to balancing study at Cambridge. You were able to get the assignments done, you were able to kind of hand in the essays or the problems you needed to. But also you could have that space to kind of direct your own learning more and read what you wanted to. So in response to that, I thought it would be quite a nice idea to have a kind of digital appy-based thing where it would be part reference manager, part timetable, and you could plug in, right, this is what I might come back to and read. Someone's probably already done this. But this is what I might come back to and read, specifically in the Cambridge vacations. And I think I'd called it, what would I call it? I called it My Cambridge Vacation as kind of a really cheesy placeholder. And I went to see the Students' Union, and they loved the thing, they loved the concept, but they're like, you can't call it that. And all the students are just going to think they have to work throughout the entirety of the vacation, and this is not healthy. So now I think it's under the working title Workload Manager, which is much more positive and proactive. But yeah, for me that was an interesting thing. It's something which we could respond to in various ways as libraries.
So just a couple of minor points really on the space from the Understanding Academics project, which was really just to say the academics that came out quite strongly that they really value the library space for their students, and they often send their students to that space. Maybe unlike Cambridge, we have quite a lot of group work, so students are expected to work as groups. But also what we found quite interesting, and I don't necessarily think we thought at the start that this would come out, was that the academics themselves talked about wanting to use that library space, but being very conscious that they shouldn't use it, particularly in term time, because they were taking up kind of valuable seats. And it's exams at York at the moment, in fact, and the library is absolutely rammed. It's chock-a-block. But I thought it was really interesting, and a couple of academics who I know and talk to as well, who do work in the library sometimes, say the same thing, which is, I just need to get away from my desk. I don't want people coming to interrupt me and my email going ping, ping, ping. So I just thought it was quite interesting that they do value that space.
So this was one of our kind of later additions to this presentation, the slide deck, and I was like, I've got stuff on space, you've got anything on space. So some of you will know that we've, over the past few years with Futurelib, we've done a lot of work looking at various aspects of people's use of space and environment design and how that kind of works in the library and in a higher education context. So essentially, my answer was not a lot at the moment. Very intentionally with this project, I didn't set out to talk to people a huge amount about that because we've done quite recent work in that area. However, there are a couple of things which came out as a matter of course, which I found really interesting. So I saw a real, for me, kind of increased evidence of learning happening on the go and away from the classroom and away from the university estate. So there are extremes to this. The left, for you, the left, yeah. Quote here is from a graduate medic who's using apps in the backs of ambulances, and that's their relationship with information. They need that information now. There was also another, I will tell you, it's slightly rude. But anyway, but they also talked about having to very, very much prep for the more intimate exams that they were doing, because you didn't want to be trying to recall information in certain clinical settings. It's probably a very polite way of saying something slightly rude. But yeah, so that was how they were learning. That was a key part of their study and their use of information. The other quote is from a PGCE student I mentioned earlier who took part in our diary study. And this person's saying, I'm listening to podcasts in my car, obviously hands-free. He's very quick to say that, they're very quick to say that. But this dilemma about not being able to make notes. And so again, for us as kind of providers of information services, how do we respond to that? That's a really kind of unique and interesting way of studying. But these were not the only two people by far. I had people listening to podcasts when they were kind of walking or cycling around Cambridge, using media in a lot of different ways. But yeah, and definitely specific quotes from people saying learning doesn't happen in the class, doesn't have to happen in the classroom. There was also a very confusing diary study entry by someone saying, I'm flying from Cambridge to Cambridge and I'm doing work on the plane. Ended up at Cambridge, Massachusetts, because it is Harvard, isn't it, in that area. They had a partner in that area. So yeah, planes, trains, automobiles, it was happening on the go. Anything else that was interesting about space use? No, it was reinforced for us the fact this provision to cater for a Alone Together study, again, kind of similar-ish to the group work, but different characteristics. And yes, that was what we learned about space. Okay, right.
So we're going to sum up on the benefits and then leave some time for questions. So at York, the big benefits for us, and actually like your study at Cambridge, we had no idea what was going to come out of it. Quite naively, we walked into this thinking, yeah, we'll just see what happens. So what did come out of it were some really key questions for us, which have really developed into our library strategy, which is focused around space, skills and scholarship. So those three areas, and some questions that we really need to think about and address as we go forward. It did also create our user requirements for a new reading list software. So at the time we had an in-house system which came out very unfavourably, it's fair to say, in the interviews, or in the semi-structured interviews. But what it did tell us was all the problems. So we didn't have to go back out to the community to ask them what they wanted. We just summarised from what they told us. We had a number of quick wins, and by quick wins I mean tiny things, and the whole point of UX is you change as you go through. We also were CSE Customer Service Excellence accredited directorate, and we have 13 compliance pluses. A lot of those are for customer insight around the work that we do with UX. And a lot of it is to do with the work that we've done with understanding academics, which has been articulated by our assessor. We've also produced a journal article, and there's links at the end, for what it means to be an academic at York. And what I would say is, some people have said, oh, I think we might do that at our institution. please don't, because I don't think it's any different. So just use what's there. Librarians are so good at gathering more and more data. Just act on what's there. So that's my plea to you all. We also did the analysis of the key themes, which happen to, you'll see, align with our library strategy, space, scholarship and skills, and that's been published in Libre Quarterly. We also obviously developed a load of UX skills for our staff, and our UX projects before the Understanding Academics project had been conducted by interns, and it was at this point that we decided to bring that expertise in-house. So we did invest time to make sure that staff, particularly confidence, is a big thing, and then just knowing how to ask open-ended questions, and the more you do it, the better you get. You know, you still end up asking things where it's a yes, no, and you think, that's not what I meant to do. And obviously one of the really nice things was just the conversations with people and making building those new relationships with staff. And although the liaison librarians, they're very good and they know their departments, they don't know everyone. So it was a really nice opportunity to talk to people that we'd not talked to before. So we purposely chose people we didn't know.
Okay, I will zip through because we'll have about 5 minutes of questions. Very pleased now that I don't have to go and conduct 142 interviews with academics. So that's nice, because that'll take a while. Thank you. So I tried to kind of draw similarities here again. So as Jess made reference to this morning, and as all of you probably will know, we've been looking at our own strategic kind of plans, visions, etc. here. So this was kind of an opportune time to get the student voice to feed into that strategic level activity and planning and our priorities. Also I talked about the more immediate, as Michelle just has, so feeding directly into kind of services, products and activity of Kiln. So I was talking to Helen Murphy, who was developing the CAM guides, interface and system, or system's not the right word, that thing, and also to Libby and other aspects of what was going on there. Chose the 10 because I like that there were 10. Those are all available online at links later if you want to see. Yeah, and I chose the relationships because it was true. It's the same as, I think there's always it's not even a fringe benefit, but it's a natural benefit. We started by talking about people being very, very happy that people were expressing interest in who they were and what they were doing. But even just going out there and having those open conversations with people, it is a relationship builder as well as a data gatherer. So that's, really positive aspects of this work. I've bandied about a little bit a quote from Graham Virgo, who's our presidency for education, but it did also have a very positive reception by people leaning on education outside of libraries. What I should have said at the start of this presentation in terms of why I was looking at students when you're looking at academics is because we all know Cambridge is having a kind of a renewed focus on teaching and learning alongside the research aspects of what we do as an institution. And we're missing major survey results and things like that. So at least I could provide some data and insight into what the students are up to at the moment. Okay, we will get back to that slide because I'll leave Michelle's links up. Many of you probably never will know where the Futurelib stuff sits. Google it, you'll find it. And then I think I did what other person did earlier. I'll leave those links up. So this is Michelle's published stuff in a way that Futurelib stuff is not published, but also the blog and things like that.
So the second link there is just the free, the open access version of the Taylor and Francis article, in case you don't have access.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah.
Right, I think we're done.
Yeah.
I think that's everything from us. So
Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Sorry.